Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable and let your breathing slow. If you enjoy peaceful anime stories like this one, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment to let me know which anime you'd like to hear next. Your support helps this channel continue creating calm, relaxing stories for rest and sleep. Now, let the day fade away and let the story begin. On her 15th birthday, Kagome Higurashi lived an ordinary life at her family's shrine, unaware that everything was about to change. As she went about her day, she was suddenly pulled into the old well behind her home by a mysterious force, dragging her deep into darkness. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a completely different world, one filled with forests, danger, and something far beyond her understanding. In this unfamiliar land, Kagome soon discovered that demons were real, and even worse, they were drawn to her. A terrifying centipede demon attacked her, sensing something powerful hidden within her body. In her panic, Kagome ran through the forest until she came across a strange sight. A boy with silver hair pinned to a sacred tree by an arrow, frozen in time as if he had been waiting for her. That boy was Inuyasha, a half-demon who had been sealed there for 50 years by a priestess named Kikyo. Desperate to survive, Kagome pulled the arrow free, breaking the seal and awakening him. Inuyasha quickly defeated the demon, but his attention turned to Kagome, sensing the presence of the powerful Shikon Jewel within her. As the truth came to light, Kagome learned that she was the reincarnation of Kikyo, the guardian of the sacred jewel. The Shikon Jewel, capable of granting immense power, had reappeared through her, making her a target for countless demons. What began as a simple day had now become something much larger, pulling her into a journey she could no longer escape. And as Kagome stood beside Inuyasha for the first time, the quiet forest around them held the beginning of something neither of them yet understood, a shared path that would lead them across time, danger, and destiny itself. The next morning in the quiet village, Kagome struggled to understand the reality she had been thrown into, still adjusting to a world filled with demons and ancient powers. Though everything felt unfamiliar, there was something within her that seemed to belong there, as if this place had been waiting for her all along. Standing beside Inuyasha, she realized that her life in the present had already begun to feel distant. Soon after, the villagers brought forth the sacred Shikon Jewel, recognizing Kagome as the reincarnation of the priestess Kikyo who once protected it. The jewel carried immense power, capable of granting any wish, but it also attracted danger from every corner of the world. Inuyasha, driven by his own desires, made it clear that he intended to use the jewel for himself, setting the tone for their uneasy partnership. Before anything could be decided, danger returned in the form of another demon, drawn by the presence of the jewel within Kagome. The attack came suddenly, forcing Kagome and Inuyasha to act together despite their lack of trust in one another. In the chaos, Kagome was given a bow and arrow, something that felt strangely natural in her hands, as if she had done it before. With fear and instinct guiding her, Kagome fired an arrow at the demon, but instead of hitting her target cleanly, the arrow struck the Shikon Jewel itself. In a single moment, the jewel shattered into countless fragments, scattering across the land and disappearing into the world beyond. The power they had just begun to understand was now lost, broken into pieces that would bring even greater danger. The silence that followed felt heavier than the battle itself, as the weight of what had happened began to settle in. The shattered jewel meant that its power could now fall into the hands of anyone, human or demon alike, turning it into a threat far greater than before. Kagome realized that her actions, though unintentional, had changed everything. Inuyasha, though frustrated, understood what needed to be done, as the scattered shards would only bring chaos if left alone. Despite their differences, he chose to continue traveling with Kagome, recognizing that her connection to the jewel made her essential to finding its fragments. Their journey was no longer a choice, but a responsibility they now shared. As they set out beyond the village, the road ahead stretched into unknown lands, filled with unseen dangers and hidden enemies. Each step carried them further into a world where trust would be tested and strength would be challenged. And though neither of them said it out loud, the path they had begun would tie their fates together in ways neither of them yet understood. With the wind moving gently through the trees, Kagome took one last look back before following Inuyasha forward, leaving behind the life she once knew. The journey to recover the Shikon Jewel had begun, not just as a mission, but as the start of something much deeper. As Kagome and Inuyasha continued their journey across the feudal lands, the weight of their mission began to settle more deeply into their hearts. The scattered shards of the Shikon Jewel had become more than just objects to collect. They were a source of danger that could fall into the wrong hands at any moment. Still learning to trust each other, the two traveled forward, guided by Kagome's ability to sense the fragments hidden across the land. Not long into their journey, they encountered a young fox demon named Shippo, whose small size and playful nature hid a deep sadness. He had been searching for vengeance against the Thunder Brothers, demons who had taken his father's life and stolen a jewel shard. Though he first appeared as a trickster, it quickly became clear that Shippo was alone, carrying a burden far heavier than someone his age should bear. Moved by his story, Kagome chose to help him, despite the danger that came with confronting powerful enemies. Inuyasha, though reluctant at first, agreed to assist, recognizing something familiar in Shippo's pain. Together, they faced the Thunder Brothers, entering a battle that tested not only their strength, but their ability to fight as a team for the first time. The fight was intense, with the enemy's power enhanced by the jewel shard, making them far more dangerous than ordinary demons. Inuyasha struggled to gain control of the situation, but through determination and quick thinking, he managed to turn the battle in their favor. Kagome's support and Shippo's courage played a key role, showing that even the smallest among them could make a difference. In the end, the Thunder Brothers were defeated, and the jewel shards they carried were recovered, bringing a small victory to the group. For Shippo, it was not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of something new, as the emptiness left by his loss began to ease. Though he had set out alone, he now found himself standing beside others who understood what it meant to keep moving forward. With nowhere else to go, Shippo chose to travel with Kagome and Inuyasha, becoming part of their growing group. His presence brought a lighter energy to their journey, balancing the dangers they faced with moments of warmth and connection. And as the three of them continued on their path, their bond slowly began to form into something stronger than any of them had expected. As the road stretched further ahead, filled with unknown challenges and hidden enemies, their journey began to take on a new meaning. It was no longer just about collecting shards, but about the connections they were building along the way. And though the world around them remained dangerous, they were no longer walking it alone. As Kagome, Inuyasha, and Shippo continued their journey, the path ahead led them deeper into lands where the influence of the Shikon Jewel could be felt more strongly. Each shard they encountered brought new dangers, drawing both demons and humans who sought its power for their own desires. Though they had grown closer, the challenges they faced began to test their trust and understanding of one another. During their travels, they soon encountered a wandering monk named Miroku, whose calm demeanor and clever words hid a dangerous secret. At first, he appeared to be another traveler seeking the jewel shards, but his true intentions became clear when he attempted to take the shards for himself. Despite this, there was something about him that suggested he was not simply an enemy. As the truth unfolded, Miroku revealed the curse he carried, the wind tunnel in his hand, a dark power that would one day consume him entirely. This curse had been passed down through his family, originating from a mysterious and powerful enemy connected to the Shikon Jewel. For Miroku, the journey was not just about survival, but about ending the source of that curse once and for all. That enemy was Naraku, a name that began to echo with growing importance as the group learned more about him. Though they had not yet faced him directly, his presence could be felt behind many of the events they encountered. Miroku's determination to defeat Naraku aligned with their own mission, creating a shared purpose that brought them together. Reluctantly at first, Inuyasha accepted Miroku as part of their group, recognizing that his knowledge and abilities would be valuable in the battles ahead. Kagome, seeing beyond his flaws, welcomed him more openly, understanding that his past had shaped who he had become. With each passing moment, their small group began to feel more like a team, bound by both purpose and shared struggles. As they traveled together, their conversations revealed more about the world they were navigating, a place where power, loss, and destiny were deeply intertwined. The journey was no longer just about collecting scattered shards, but about confronting a growing darkness that connected them all. And with Naraku's name now known, the path ahead became clearer, though far more dangerous than before. Under the fading light of the evening sky, the group moved forward once again, now stronger in both number and resolve. Each step carried them closer to answers, but also toward greater conflict that awaited them in the distance. And as the wind moved quietly through the trees, it carried with it a sense that their true battle had only just begun. As their journey continued, the group soon found themselves drawn into a new conflict that would deepen their connection to the growing darkness surrounding them. They arrived at a village that had been attacked by demons, only to discover a lone survivor, a young woman named Sango, a skilled demon slayer. Her strength and determination were clear, but beneath it all was a deep sorrow that she carried silently. Sango revealed that her entire village had been destroyed in a brutal attack, one that had been carefully orchestrated through deception. Worse still, her younger brother Kohaku, whom she believed had died, had been used as a weapon against her own people. The truth behind the attack pointed toward a single name that had begun to follow the group: Naraku, the shadow behind countless tragedies. Driven by grief and anger, Sango initially sought revenge, believing that destroying Naraku would be the only way to find peace. However, her path was clouded by manipulation, as Naraku continued to control Kohaku, forcing him to act against his own will. The emotional weight of fighting someone she loved left Sango torn between her duty and her heart. Inuyasha and the others chose to stand by her, offering support not just as allies, but as people who understood what it meant to carry pain. Through their actions, Sango began to see that she was no longer alone, and that her fight did not have to be faced in isolation. Slowly, the bond between them grew stronger, forming a connection that went beyond their shared mission. During their confrontation, the truth of Naraku's cruelty became even clearer, as he revealed his ability to manipulate both humans and demons alike. His power did not come only from strength, but from deception, turning people against each other and feeding on their suffering. This made him far more dangerous than any enemy they had faced before. Despite the emotional struggle, Sango chose to continue forward, joining the group not just for revenge, but to stop Naraku from causing further destruction. Her presence added both strength and depth to their journey, as each member now carried their own reason for continuing. Together, they began to understand that their paths had become connected by something greater than chance. As they left the ruined village behind, the weight of their growing enemy followed them closely, shaping the direction of their journey. With Sango now at their side, the group moved forward with a stronger sense of purpose, knowing that the battle against Naraku was no longer distant. And as the wind carried them onward, their journey became not just about survival, but about confronting the darkness that tied all their fates together. As the group continued their journey, now strengthened by Sango's presence, the road ahead slowly began to reveal deeper layers of the conflict they were caught in. The name Naraku was no longer just a distant threat, but a shadow that lingered behind every battle and every sorrow they encountered. Though they had yet to face him directly, his influence could be felt in the pain carried by each member of the group. During their travels, they encountered new enemies unlike any they had faced before. Beings not born naturally, but created from Naraku himself. Among them were Kagura and Kana, mysterious figures who moved with quiet purpose, carrying out Naraku's will without hesitation. Their presence revealed a chilling truth. Naraku was not just a single enemy, but a force capable of extending himself in many forms. Kagura, though bound to Naraku, showed hints of a different desire, one for freedom. Beneath her calm and distant expression, there was a quiet longing to escape the control that held her captive. Kana, on the other hand, remained emotionless and silent, acting as a reflection of Naraku's cold and calculating nature. Together, they became constant reminders of the enemy's reach. As these encounters unfolded, Inuyasha began to struggle more deeply with his own limits, especially when facing enemies protected by powerful barriers. It became clear that his current strength was not enough to overcome Naraku's defenses. This realization led him to seek out ways to strengthen the Tessaiga, the sword left to him by his father, which held hidden power yet to be fully unlocked. Kagome remained at his side, offering both support and balance as his determination grew stronger. She continued to sense the jewel shards, guiding the group forward, while also helping them stay grounded during moments of tension. Her presence became a steady force that kept the group united, even as the challenges around them intensified. Meanwhile, the emotional bonds within the group continued to deepen, especially between Sango and Miroku, whose shared burdens brought them closer together. Though their personalities often clashed in lighthearted ways, there was a growing understanding between them, one that added warmth to their otherwise dangerous journey. As the group moved forward, the path ahead became more defined, leading them closer to the heart of Naraku's web. Each encounter, each battle, and each connection they formed brought them one step nearer to the inevitable confrontation. And though the road remained uncertain, they continued on together, carrying both their hopes and their scars into the battles that awaited them. As the group pressed onward, the dangers surrounding them began to grow more intense, no longer just scattered encounters, but carefully planned attacks tied to Naraku's expanding influence. It became clear that he was watching them closely, learning from each battle, and sending stronger enemies to test their limits. The journey was no longer just about finding shards, it was about surviving a growing war. One of the most difficult moments came when Inuyasha faced an enemy who could read his thoughts, exposing his weaknesses and fears during battle. In that moment, his control began to slip, and his demon blood surged to the surface, transforming him into something far more dangerous. His strength increased, but at the cost of his humanity, putting even his own friends at risk. Kagome, however, refused to step back, even as the others hesitated. She approached him calmly, speaking to him not as a warrior, but as someone who believed in him. Her voice reached through the chaos, grounding him and helping him return to himself. It was a moment that showed not just strength, but trust, something deeper than any power they possessed. After this battle, Inuyasha began to understand that power alone was not enough. If he lost control, he could become just as dangerous as the enemies they fought. This realization pushed him to seek greater mastery over himself and the Tessaiga, knowing that true strength required balance, not just force. Meanwhile, Naraku continued to manipulate events from the shadows, using Kohaku as a pawn to emotionally weaken Sango. Even when they gained small victories, Naraku's influence remained, reminding them that the true battle was far from over. His ability to control others and create powerful incarnations made him an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Despite these hardships, the group grew stronger together, learning to rely on one another not just in battle, but in moments of doubt and fear. Miroku's wisdom, Sango's resolve, Kagome's compassion, and Inuyasha's determination began to align, forming a bond that could withstand even the darkest trials ahead. As night fell and they made camp beneath the quiet sky, there was a sense that their journey was changing. The simple search for jewel shards had transformed into something far greater, a fight against a carefully woven darkness that touched every part of their lives. And as the firelight flickered softly, the group rested for a brief moment, knowing that the path ahead would only grow more difficult, and that their next steps would bring them closer to the heart of Naraku's true power. As the group continued their journey, the weight of Naraku's presence grew heavier, no longer distant but actively shaping the path ahead of them. Every village they passed seemed touched by his influence, whether through destruction, fear, or manipulation. It became clear that Naraku was not simply waiting. He was carefully moving pieces into place, preparing for something far greater. In the midst of this, Inuyasha sought greater strength within the Tessaiga, knowing that ordinary attacks would never reach Naraku's true body. Through intense battles and trials, the sword began to reveal new abilities, each one unlocking a deeper connection to his father's legacy. These powers were not easily gained, and each required Inuyasha to confront both his strength and his weaknesses. At the same time, Kagome's spiritual powers continued to grow, allowing her to sense the Shikon Jewel shards more clearly than ever before. Her arrows became stronger, capable of purifying even the darkest energies, and her role in the group became increasingly vital. Though she often doubted herself, her presence remained the heart that held everyone together. Meanwhile, Sesshomaru, Inuyasha's older brother, began to appear more frequently, walking his own path separate from the group. Though cold and distant, his actions hinted at a quiet evolution within him, especially through his connection to Rin, the young girl who followed him. His strength rivaled Inuyasha's, yet his journey was driven by a different kind of purpose. As tensions rose, the group encountered Koga, a wolf demon leader who also sought the jewel shards to protect his tribe. His rivalry with Inuyasha was immediate and intense, often leading to clashes fueled by pride and stubbornness. Yet beneath their conflict was a shared goal, creating an uneasy balance between competition and cooperation. Naraku's manipulations continued to deepen, especially through Kohaku, whose fragmented memories left him trapped between control and his true self. Sango struggled silently, watching her brother fight against them without understanding why. This pain became one of the most difficult burdens she carried, yet she refused to give up hope that he could still be saved. As night fell once again, the group rested under the quiet sky, each of them carrying thoughts they could not fully express. Their journey had grown more complex, filled not only with battles, but with emotions that tied them together in ways they never expected. The search for the jewel shards was no longer just a mission. It had become a story of bonds, loss, and the fragile hope that kept them moving forward. As the journey deepened, the group began to understand that Naraku was no longer simply observing them. He was evolving. Each encounter revealed that his power was growing, shaped by the Shikon Jewel shards he continued to gather. His body changed, his abilities expanded, and the distance between them and their enemy began to feel both closer and more dangerous at the same time. In one of their more difficult battles, Inuyasha faced enemies capable of breaking through even his strongest attacks, forcing him to push the limits of the Tessaiga. Through struggle and persistence, the sword awakened new abilities, including the power to break barriers that once seemed impossible to destroy. This marked a turning point, as Inuyasha began to fight not just with strength, but with purpose and control. At the same time, Kagura's quiet rebellion against Naraku became more noticeable. Though she continued to act under his command, there were moments when she subtly aided Inuyasha's group, revealing fragments of Naraku's plans. Her desire for freedom grew stronger, even though her life remained bound to Naraku's will through the heart he controlled. Kana, ever silent, continued to watch over events with an emotionless gaze, acting as Naraku's eyes and messenger. Unlike Kagura, she showed no outward resistance, making her presence even more unsettling. Together, the two represented different sides of Naraku's power, one longing to break free, the other completely bound to his control. Meanwhile, Kohaku's struggle became more visible as fragments of his memory returned. Though still under Naraku's influence, there were moments when his true self surfaced, creating hesitation in his actions. Sango noticed these changes, holding on to hope that her brother was still somewhere within the darkness controlling him. The group's bond continued to strengthen as they faced these emotional and physical challenges together. Miroku's calm guidance, Sango's quiet resilience, Kagome's compassion, and Inuyasha's growing determination began to align more naturally. What once felt like a temporary alliance had become something far deeper, something that could withstand the weight of their shared pasts. As they moved through quiet forests and distant villages, the atmosphere around them carried a sense of approaching change. The battles were no longer isolated events, but pieces of a larger conflict slowly unfolding. Every shard they collected, every enemy they defeated, brought them closer to a confrontation that would decide everything. And as the wind passed gently through the trees once more, it carried a quiet tension with it, as if the world itself was preparing for what was to come. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing had become clear. Naraku was no longer hiding in the shadows. He was waiting. As their journey continued, the group slowly began to realize that Naraku's greatest strength was not just his power, but his ability to divide hearts and create doubt. Even when they were not facing him directly, his presence lingered in the choices they had to make and the emotions they struggled to control. The path forward was no longer just about fighting enemies, but about protecting what held them together. During this time, the truth behind Naraku's origins began to surface, revealing that he was not born as a demon, but as something far more tragic. Long ago, he had been a human named Onigumo, consumed by dark desires and hatred, which eventually led him to merge with countless demons. From that twisted beginning, Naraku was formed, a being driven by both longing and destruction. This revelation brought a new understanding to the group, especially as they reflected on how deeply Naraku's actions had affected each of their lives. He had been the cause of Inuyasha and Kikyo's separation, the one who cursed Miroku's family, and the one who destroyed Sango's village. Each of them carried a piece of the damage he had left behind, binding their fates together in a way none of them could ignore. Meanwhile, Kagome continued to grow stronger, not just in her spiritual abilities, but in her emotional strength. She began to understand that the Shikon Jewel itself was not simply a source of power, but something that responded to the hearts of those who sought it. This made their mission even more delicate, as the line between purity and corruption became increasingly blurred. Inuyasha, too, continued to evolve, learning to rely not only on his strength, but on the people beside him. His connection with Kagome deepened, creating moments of quiet understanding that balanced the chaos of their battles. Though his past with Kikyo remained unresolved, his heart slowly began to find clarity as he moved forward. At the same time, Sesshomaru's path began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Though he remained distant, his actions showed a growing sense of protection toward Rin, and even a quiet acknowledgement of Inuyasha's strength. His journey, though separate, began to intersect with theirs in ways that suggested change was coming. As the group traveled under a quiet sky once more, there was a growing sense that everything was beginning to connect: the past, the present, and the battles still ahead. The truth about Naraku had changed how they saw their enemy, but it had also strengthened their resolve to stop him, no matter the cost. And as the wind carried their footsteps forward, it felt as though the world itself was preparing for what lay ahead. A confrontation not just of power, but of hearts shaped by pain, hope, and the choices they would soon have to make. As their journey continued, the group found themselves stepping closer to the center of Naraku's growing web, where every path seemed to lead back to him. The enemies they faced were no longer random, but carefully placed obstacles meant to slow them down or divide their focus. It became clear that Naraku was watching their every move, learning from them, and preparing something far more dangerous than before. During this time, they encountered a group of powerful enemies known as the Band of Seven, warriors revived and controlled through the power of the Shikon Jewel shards. Each member possessed unique abilities and overwhelming strength, making them some of the most dangerous opponents the group had ever faced. Their presence marked a shift in the journey, turning it into a series of intense battles that tested both skill and endurance. Inuyasha faced these enemies head-on, pushing the limits of the Tessaiga with every clash. Each fight demanded more from him, not just physically, but mentally, as he began to understand that strength alone would not be enough to overcome what lay ahead. The battles became longer, harder, and more personal, forcing him to grow with each encounter. Kagome remained close, supporting him with her spiritual power, her arrows becoming more precise and powerful as her confidence grew. She continued to sense the jewel shards, guiding them through danger, while also acting as the emotional anchor that kept the group from losing themselves in the chaos. Her presence brought a sense of calm, even in the middle of overwhelming conflict. Meanwhile, Sango and Miroku fought side by side with increasing coordination, their trust in each other becoming more natural with every battle. Sango's determination to save Kohaku remained strong, even as she faced enemies that reminded her of everything she had lost. Miroku, despite the burden of his curse, continued to stand firm, using both wisdom and strength to protect those around him. As they defeated each member of the Band of Seven, the path ahead slowly cleared, but the cost of each battle weighed heavily on them. The enemies they faced were not just powerful. They were reminders of how far Naraku was willing to go to maintain control. Every victory felt earned, but never easy. Through it all, Kohaku's presence lingered in the background, still bound to Naraku, yet showing faint signs of resistance. There were moments when his actions hesitated, as if something within him was trying to break free. Sango held on to those moments, believing that her brother was still fighting from within. As the final battle with the Band of Seven came to an end, the group stood at the edge of something greater, the air around them carrying a quiet tension. They had grown stronger, closer, and more prepared than ever before. But deep down, they all understood the same truth. The battles they had just fought were only a beginning, and Naraku himself was still waiting ahead. As the dust from the battles with the Band of Seven finally settled, a quiet but heavy realization began to form within the group. Though they had fought with everything they had, Naraku himself had remained just out of reach, using others to shield himself while he continued to grow stronger. Their victories felt meaningful, yet incomplete, as if they had only been clearing the path towards something far greater. With the mountain of Hakare behind them, the group slowly began to sense a shift in the atmosphere around them. The purification barrier that once weakened Inuyasha was gone, and with it came a return of his full strength. But even with this advantage, there was an uneasy feeling that Naraku had already gained what he needed from the time he had spent hidden there. As they continued forward, Kikyo reappeared, her presence bringing a quiet tension that settled over both Kagome and Inuyasha. Her path remained separate, yet deeply connected to theirs, as she continued to pursue Naraku in her own way. The unresolved emotions between her and Inuyasha lingered beneath the surface, creating moments of silence that spoke louder than words. Kagome, though affected by this, chose to remain steady, focusing on the path ahead rather than the uncertainties in her heart. Her strength was no longer just in her powers, but in her ability to endure and move forward without losing herself. In quiet moments, she began to understand that her role in this journey was something only she could fulfill. Meanwhile, Naraku's actions became more calculated than ever, as he began to separate parts of himself to eliminate the last remnants of weakness within him. By casting aside his own heart, he removed the one thing that could hold him back, his lingering human emotions. This transformation marked a dangerous turning point, making him colder, more focused, and far more difficult to defeat. Kagura, still bound to Naraku, felt this change deeply, as it pushed her even further into a life without freedom. Her quiet desire to escape grew stronger, even as the chains that held her tightened. In her fleeting moments of defiance, there was a sense that her story was slowly moving towards something inevitable. As the group traveled beneath a dim evening sky, there was a growing understanding among them that the journey was entering a new phase. The battles were no longer just about survival or collecting shards, but about confronting the true form of the enemy they had been chasing all along. Each step forward carried a weight that could no longer be ignored. And as the wind moved softly through the trees once more, it carried with it a quiet warning that the final pieces of their story were beginning to fall into place, and that the road ahead would test not just their strength, but everything they believed in. As the journey moved forward, the air around the group began to feel heavier, as if every step they took was drawing them closer to the center of something unavoidable. Naraku was no longer simply reacting, he was preparing, gathering the final shards of the Shikon Jewel and shaping his ultimate form. The closer they came, the more the world itself seemed to bend under his growing power. During this time, Kagura's quiet resistance reached a turning point, as her desire for freedom became stronger than her fear of Naraku. Though she had always acted under his command, there were moments where she chose her own path, even if only briefly. Her actions, though subtle, showed that even those bound by darkness could still long for something beyond it. In a quiet but deeply emotional moment, Kagura finally faced the truth of her existence, understanding that her life had always been controlled by Naraku's will. Despite this, she chose to act on her own terms one last time, seeking a freedom she had never truly known. Her story became a reflection of the cost of Naraku's power, leaving a lasting impact on those who witnessed it. At the same time, Kohaku's struggle reached a critical point, as his memories slowly returned, allowing him to recognize both Sango and the pain of his past. Though still connected to Naraku, his will began to break through the control that had held him for so long. This gave Sango renewed hope, strengthening her resolve to save her brother no matter what it took. Meanwhile, Inuyasha continued to push the limits of the Tessaiga, unlocking abilities that brought him closer to matching Naraku's growing strength. Each new power came with its own challenge, forcing him to learn not just how to fight, but how to control the overwhelming forces within him. His growth was no longer just about becoming stronger, but about becoming someone who could protect what mattered most. Kagome, too, began to sense a deeper connection with the Shikon Jewel, understanding that its true nature was tied to the hearts of those who sought it. The closer it came to completion, the more dangerous it became, not just because of its power, but because of the choices it demanded. She began to realize that the final battle would not be decided by strength alone. As their paths continued to intertwine, Sesshomaru's role also began to shift, his actions showing a quiet evolution that contrasted with his once cold and distant nature. Though he rarely spoke of it, his choices revealed a growing sense of purpose beyond power, one shaped by the bonds he had formed along the way. And as the group stood beneath a darkening sky, there was a shared understanding among them that the end of their journey was approaching. The scattered pieces of their story were beginning to come together, leading them toward a final confrontation that would decide everything. The wind carried a quiet stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was to come. As the journey pressed forward, the group began to feel that everything was slowly tightening around them, as if Naraku's presence was closing in from every direction. The scattered battles and encounters were no longer separate events, but part of a single, carefully controlled design. Every step they took seemed to lead them closer to Naraku's true form, hidden behind layers of deception and protection. At this stage, the remaining Shikon Jewel shards became more difficult to obtain, as Naraku himself had gathered most of them, bringing the jewel closer to completion. With its power nearly whole, the balance of the world began to shift, and even the air around them carried a heavier, darker presence. The closer the jewel came to completion, the more dangerous everything became. Inuyasha continued to push himself further, unlocking deeper abilities within the Tessaiga, learning to cut through barriers and even strike enemies beyond physical reach. Each new power came with greater responsibility, forcing him to remain steady and focused. He was no longer just fighting to win. He was fighting to protect the people who had become his reason to move forward. Kagome's role also deepened, as her connection to the Shikon Jewel became more intense and more personal. She began to sense not just the shards, but the intentions behind them, understanding that the jewel responded to the heart of the one who used it. This realization made her both stronger and more cautious, knowing that a single wrong choice could change everything. Meanwhile, Miroku's curse grew more dangerous with each passing battle, the wind tunnel threatening to consume him sooner than expected. Despite this, he continued to fight without hesitation, determined to see the end of Naraku no matter the cost. Sango stood beside him, her quiet strength supporting him as their bond deepened into something more certain and unspoken. Kohaku, now regaining more of his memories, began to act on his own will more often, slowly breaking free from Naraku's control. Though still in danger, his actions showed a growing strength within him, giving Sango hope that her brother could truly be saved. Each moment of clarity brought them closer to a reunion that once felt impossible. Sesshomaru's presence also became more significant, as he moved closer to the final conflict in his own way. Though he rarely fought alongside the group, his actions began to align with theirs, showing that even he recognized the scale of the threat Naraku posed. His quiet growth mirrored the changes happening within all of them. As the sky darkened and the wind grew still, the group stood together with a shared understanding that the final battle was no longer distant. The pieces had come together, the paths had aligned, and the time for hesitation had passed. Ahead of them waited the end of a long journey and the beginning of its most important moment. As the final stage of their journey drew closer, the group stepped into a world that no longer felt like the one they had known before. The land itself seemed corrupted, shaped by the overwhelming presence of the nearly completed Shikon Jewel. Even the air carried a heavy stillness, as if everything was waiting for the final clash that would decide the fate of both humans and demons. Naraku, now at the peak of his power, had fully merged with the Shikon Jewel, transforming into something far beyond what he once was. His form was no longer stable or human-like, but vast and ever-changing, as if the darkness within him had finally taken complete control. He had become the very embodiment of the hatred and desire that the jewel fed upon. Inuyasha and the others pressed forward without hesitation, knowing that this was the moment everything had been leading to. Each of them carried the weight of their past into this final battle. Sango's grief, Miroku's curse, Kagome's responsibility, and Inuyasha's long journey of growth. Their resolve was no longer shaken by fear, but strengthened by everything they had endured together. As they entered Naraku's domain, the battle began not just outside, but within, as they were drawn into the depths of his body itself. It was a place where reality twisted, where illusions and darkness blurred the line between truth and deception. Naraku attempted to break them not only with force, but by attacking their hearts and memories. In that moment, Inuyasha was once again pushed to his limits, the darkness of the jewel attempting to consume him from within. His strength wavered as the power threatened to take control, but Kagome refused to let him fall. She reached him once more, her voice steady and unwavering, pulling him back from the edge just as she had done before. Meanwhile, the others fought with everything they had, breaking through Naraku's defenses piece by piece. Sango and Miroku stood together, no longer burdened by hesitation, while Kohaku fought alongside them with his own will finally restored. Even Sesshomaru joined the battle in his own way, his strength cutting through the chaos with quiet precision. As the battle reached its peak, it became clear that defeating Naraku would not be as simple as destroying his body. The Shikon Jewel itself was the true source of his power, and as long as it remained, the darkness would continue. The final answer did not lie in strength alone, but in a choice that only Kagome could make. And as everything came to a standstill for a single moment, with the fate of their world hanging in balance, Kagome stood at the center of it all, realizing that the end of this long journey would depend not on a battle, but on the wish she was about to make. As everything reached its breaking point, Kagome found herself drawn fully into the heart of the Shikon Jewel, a place where time and reality seemed to stand still. Inside, the world was quiet yet overwhelming, filled with a presence that felt both ancient and alive. It was here that the true nature of the jewel revealed itself, not just as an object of power, but as something that had been guiding events all along. The jewel spoke to her, attempting to influence her thoughts, urging her to make a wish that would bind her to it forever. It showed her visions of what she desired most, trying to lead her toward a selfish choice that would keep the cycle of conflict alive. The jewel did not seek peace, it sought continuation, feeding on the endless struggle between light and darkness. At the same time, Inuyasha refused to give up, fighting his way through the darkness to reach Kagome. No matter how much the jewel tried to separate them, he continued forward, driven not by power, but by the bond they had built throughout their journey. When he finally reached her, it was not through force, but through unwavering determination and trust. Together, they stood within the stillness of the jewel, facing a decision that would end everything. Kagome realized that every wish made upon the jewel had always been flawed, shaped by desire, regret, or longing. Even Naraku's wish had been rooted in something he could never truly obtain, and that was what had trapped him in darkness from the very beginning. In that quiet moment, Kagome made her choice, not for herself, but for everyone. She wished for the Shikon Jewel to disappear forever, breaking the endless cycle it had created and freeing the souls bound within it. The moment her wish was spoken, the jewel began to shatter, its light fading as the darkness within it was finally erased. With the jewel gone, Naraku's existence came to an end, his long reign of manipulation and destruction finally over. The battle that had stretched across time and countless lives was finished, not through strength alone, but through a single, selfless decision. In that moment, the world itself seemed to breathe again, as if released from a long-held burden. But the end of the battle also brought a quiet separation. As the jewel vanished, so too did the connection that allowed Kagome to remain in the feudal era. The well that had carried her across time began to close, and before she could fully understand what was happening, she was pulled back into her own world, leaving Inuyasha behind. And as the silence settled after everything had ended, the journey that had brought them together came to a pause. Not with finality, but with the quiet promise that their story was not yet truly over. After the silence that followed Kagome's wish, time moved forward in a way none of them expected. The battle had ended, Naraku was gone, and the Shikon Jewel had disappeared completely, taking with it the long cycle of conflict that had bound so many lives together. Yet in its place came something quieter, something more uncertain, the feeling of life continuing without the chaos that had once defined it. Kagome returned to her own time, standing once again within the familiar grounds of her family shrine. The world around her felt unchanged, yet everything inside her had shifted. She carried the memories of her journey, the friendships she had formed, and the bond she had built with Inuyasha, all of which now felt distant, as if they belonged to another life she could no longer reach. Days turned into months, and months into years, as Kagome slowly adjusted to life without the feudal era. She focused on her studies, moving forward as expected. But there was always a quiet longing that remained in her heart. No matter how much time passed, she could not forget the world she had left behind, or the people who had become her home. In the feudal era, life also continued, though it carried a different kind of stillness. Inuyasha remained in the village, often returning to the well, hoping for a sign that Kagome would come back. Though he rarely spoke of it, the absence she left behind was deeply felt, shaping his days in ways he could not ignore. Sango and Miroku began to build a life together, their long journey finally leading them to a peaceful future. Kohaku continued his path as a demon slayer, growing stronger with each passing day, while Shippo trained to improve his abilities. The world they lived in had begun to heal, slowly moving away from the shadow Naraku had cast over it. Despite the peace, there was always a sense that something remained unfinished, a quiet thread connecting two different worlds that had once been one. Kagome felt it in moments of stillness, while Inuyasha felt it in the wind that passed through the trees near the well. Neither of them moved on completely, as if waiting for something neither could fully explain. Then, after 3 long years, something changed. The well that had once gone silent began to respond again, its connection slowly returning as if guided by something beyond time itself. Kagome, now older and certain of her feelings, stood before it once more, knowing that this was her final chance to choose where she truly belonged. And with a steady heart She stepped forward, leaving her world behind once more, not out of obligation, but out of love, ready to return to the place where her story had truly begun. As Kagome stepped through the well once more, the world around her shifted in a familiar yet deeply emotional way. The air of the feudal era greeted her again, carrying the same quiet wind, the same distant sounds, and the same feeling she had once called home. But this time, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Inuyasha sensed her presence before he even saw her, the feeling of her return reaching him like something he had been waiting for all along. Without hesitation, he ran, guided by nothing more than instinct and the bond they shared. When they finally saw each other again, there was no need for words, only the quiet understanding that they had both chosen this moment. Their reunion was not filled with chaos or uncertainty, but with a calm certainty that their journey had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Kagome had made her decision, leaving her modern world behind to remain in this one. Not out of obligation, but because her heart belonged here. For the first time, there was no barrier between them, no separation of time, only a shared future waiting to unfold. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm, one that no longer revolved around constant battles or the search for jewel shards. Instead, the days were filled with quieter moments, where healing could finally begin. Kagome trained alongside Kaede, continuing her path as a priestess, while also learning how to live within this era as more than just a visitor. Inuyasha, too, began to change in the absence of conflict, finding peace in the simple moments he once overlooked. Though still strong and protective, there was a calmness to him now, shaped by everything he had experienced. He no longer fought out of anger or survival alone, but out of a desire to protect the life they were building together. Around them, the others moved forward as well, each finding their own place in a world no longer overshadowed by Naraku. Sango and Miroku built a family filled with warmth and laughter, while Kohaku continued his journey with a renewed sense of purpose. Even Shippo, though still playful, worked toward growing stronger in his own way. Sesshomaru remained distant, yet his presence no longer carried the same cold detachment as before. His quiet visits and unspoken actions showed a subtle change, one that reflected his own path of growth. Though he walked alone, he was no longer untouched by the bonds he had formed. And as the sun set over the village, casting a warm golden light across the land, Inuyasha and Kagome stood side by side, looking toward a future that was finally their own. The long journey that had brought them together had come to its true end, not with a final battle, but with a quiet beginning. Thank you for spending this quiet time here. If this story brought you a sense of calm, you're always welcome to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing which anime story you'd like to hear next. New peaceful stories are added regularly, each one told slowly and softly to help you unwind and rest. For now, let your thoughts drift, your breathing slow, and the night carry you gently into sleep. Good night, and sweet dreams.